Now, good evening. So you are incredibly welcome to this week's 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum of Dublin. Now, my guest this evening is Mary Heffernan of the OPW, and Mary is going to spend some time with us this evening talking about some of the national historic properties that are under her care within the OPW. So Mary, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Sarah. I'm a huge fan of your wonderful podcast. I'm just passionate about our native capital city, and it's just such a pleasure to be here this evening.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. Thank you. I think doing some reading in advance of this evening just reminded me of quite how excited I was for it. So thank you. I'm going to just jump straight in. But to everyone who is joining us, if you've got questions for Mary, please do type them in and we will take some time to go through them as we go across the evening. But Mary, just to kind of jump back straight in and kind of, I know historic properties really allow us to look at built heritage, but also natural heritage. And there is kind of so much to it. And I'd love to just start by asking you to tell us a little bit about your role specifically with the OPW.
Yes, Sarah, really, I suppose this exciting chapter in my career kicked off in the year 2000. And that was really when I was assigned to set up and establish Farmleigh House. So, it was just such an exciting period to be part of this exceptional team that was providing this service for Ireland, for the government. I mean, it was the first time we were going to have this amazing Irish state guest house, which really is a window for the world to see Ireland. So my team, the OPW, we've always held this role as a very special role that the government asked the OPW to deliver on. And we hope now we can look back at 20 years of delivering this role to government. And there have been so many very special highlights, not least the visit of Her Majesty, the Queen of England to Ireland. And I hope in tonight's podcast, we can kind of discuss and show that, any showcase that Ireland can have to the wider world about what we're about, our identity, our history, our stories, we really have to capitalize on. And I can say myself that the cultural programme that has been rolled out at Farmleigh, harmonising in with that government role, which really has been about Dublin being a multicultural city. One things that we're very proud of, like Nepal Day, India Day, Africa Day, Japanese Day. It's been just a great privilege and honour to look at world culture and know that all of these international visitors come and stay at Farmleigh. So really, Sarah, I suppose I cut my teeth on looking at the potential and the possibility of a cultural asset in public care and kind of what could you do with it. And initially, really, the role the government set for the OPW was for it to perform that hospitality role. It was for it to perform for high-level government meetings. But I and my team were kind of more ambitious than that. And we really felt that like the fixed costs that went into running Farmleigh to be available for those important government occasions and opportunities, that really we could deliver a lot for Dubliners. We could deliver a lot for visitors from overseas and for people in Ireland if they're in Dublin. So we kind of set our mission, and it was 20 years ago. So it was really at a kind of an early stage. A lot of people now perhaps are doing a lot of what we kicked off in the very beginning, whether it was farmers markets, whether it was musical programs, exhibition programs, and we're absolutely sort of like so delighted that has become more mainstream, and certainly something I'm passionate about is that cultural assets, country houses, different buildings that are held by the people for the people, that we have a lot of public access to them. So we have looked at it from that point of view. I'd like to discuss in due course really just kind of my own philosophy about creating cultural destinations and really looking at who the stakeholders are when you try and do that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question that you raised, because it's kind of a really interesting thing that I reflected on when I was thinking about your work is when you're dealing with some of the iconic and most important buildings in kind of a lot of the key historical events that have happened over the course of our city and our country's life, you know, the buildings that you are in your care, they are really of benefit to the people of Ireland, including the people who've come before us and people who'll come after us. So it kind of made me reflect on the challenge that you must have in looking at how to engage the public and guests today, while also marrying that with kind of conservation and the kind of the minefield that goes with that. And I would love to know how you guys achieve the balance, because you do it so professionally and wonderfully, and I think it's something we can all learn from.
Oh, well, thanks very much, Sarah. And certainly in speaking with you tonight, I suppose I'm a spokesperson on behalf of, huge amount of teams, colleagues who all, link into this, and not least retired colleagues and people who have come before us. I suppose to start with and then look at these stakeholders, and I'm intrigued and interested that you yourself are talking about like our ancestors and also those who come after us, because I'm a big fan of that Edmund Burke phrase that talks about public policy decision and looking at things and having an eye to those who've come before us, the present, and also the unborn. And I think that when we talk about, even if we're looking at stakeholders and we're talking about citizens of Ireland, I mean, there's a third going to each of those categories. So we certainly can't be only in the business of delivering for current generations. And another thing I'm very keen on looking at is that any decisions that we make that might stop future generations enjoying our cultural heritage to the same extent as we have, is us not doing our job well. So I see it very much as in terms of looking at this stakeholder grouping, one major part is our ancestors. It's the people who've made the wonderful cultural heritage that we're fortunate enough to preserve. It's the current generations and how we can serve them, and it's keeping an eye for people who will come after us. So they're definitely a primary stakeholder. In terms of preservation of monuments and historic buildings, their protection and their conservation, I mean, that's, I suppose, a given in our work, that's a kind of our primary duty. I felt very strongly myself, though, with the public resources that go towards that work and all of the professionals hired to do that, both in the OPW and consultants appointed, that once that's a given and that does happen, I think the second duty, which is sharing these assets, which is educating, which is allowing people access to it, is like a huge one. And I'm a huge advocate of, if you're doing the first job well, if you've got all of your measures in place, if you've got your maintenance schedules, your conservation projects, if you've got a collections policy, protection care for the collections, there's no reason why we can't then allow people access. So I'm not a big fan of, oh, we have this monument and leave it over here and kind of that's it, we're preserving it. I think we have to work a bit harder, and I think we have to challenge ourselves to make sure that as many different types of groupings can get access in a careful manner. And I suppose for me, the stakeholder group works into, we've got families, visitors from Dublin, from Ireland, who come and visit the cultural sites. We have overseas visitors. We have our lovely schools programme. And then I suppose another sector altogether that I feel is important, that is served through the properties in the care of the OPW, would be the higher education sector. So for example, researchers who want to research these properties, their stories, their histories, I think it's very important that we have access for those. And I have, I have been working with several different higher education groups to kind of make sure that research happens. So whether it's Trinity College, Maynooth University, some different universities abroad, we're very keen to make sure that people can get access to our records, to the collections, so that they can do their work and they can add to our knowledge. So I think they're another important stakeholder. In terms of living artists, living writers, historians, architectural historians, I think it's another it's a kind of a generous way, and I think it's an important requirement that we would make the properties available to them, because I suppose human creativity and imagination and how all of that works, people are inspired by buildings, by people from our past. And I think the more access and the more programs we can provide for people to be inspired by the cultural capital embodied in the lovely places that I look after, I think it's very important that we create programs and access for those. So we've worked very hard to ensure we have exhibition programs, lecture programs, and all of these different things which give access to another sector of the citizens of Ireland, and hopefully to build cultural capital into the future.
Yeah, and it's funny actually, because I found myself looking through the properties that you take care of, and the one I was least familiar with was the casino at Marino. So I grew up in kind of in the couple of kilometre radius from a lot of the other sites, so they were much more familiar to me. And what you're saying there about integrating cultural programs as a kind of a vehicle to create access, it kind of it strikes a chord to what was it, the Earl of Charlemont, who actually set up the casino, where that was originally established, tell me correctly, but it was originally established as a place to foster dialogue about art, science, politics, philosophy, and everything in between.
Yeah, I mean, really, this little amazing temple, and it happens to actually be literally in my back garden, not quite my back garden, but I'm here just down the road from where the wonderful Casino Marino is located. And Lord Charlemont James Caulfield was one of the early patrons of culture for Dublin. I mean, the kind of original one would have been the first Duke of Ormond, and I know Professor Dickinson from Trinity has talked on him as one of our kind of founding patrons of art for the city, and establishing incredible places like the Phoenix Park and the Royal Hospital. And James Caulfield in his own way has left a marvellous legacy for the city in Charlemont House, which is now the Hugh Lane Gallery, and in the extraordinary Casino Marino, designed by Sir William Chambers, and really a model of architecture in Europe. I have shown that building to many, many visitors from all over the world, and they are just enthralled. In many ways, many have said to me that it is their absolute favorite piece of architecture in Europe, and they really feel in Ireland it's so unique in what it is. And I love the way you are discussing it in terms of it as a kind of as in the 18th century, a temple to the arts, and how that can work today. So for example, I did a project with a number of people called Meditation on Plate, and we invited contemporary artists from all over Europe in particular to respond to the extraordinary beauty of the Casino Marino, and on a ceramic plate. And we loved the idea of the kind of constraints that kind of gave, and it really, I think, forced out the creativity. And we had incredible artists, in particularly because I suppose it's inspired by Rome and Italy and the 18th century Enlightenment period, that we got a lot of Italian artists who responded to it. And it just the end product of that project helped me see yet again that these types of monuments are an incredible inspiration for living day artists. So there was a kind of a wonderful meeting of minds between our respect and our interest in our history, but also fusing it with creativity today. And I think that's a space that's really interesting for the city. And it was a lovely compliment we received from a lot of the European artists who worked on that project, of just saying, oh, in Italy, they wouldn't think of doing this type of thing, and I was like, we were like, our little tiny team were like, gosh, we were like, so sort of humbled by the fact that a project we're doing with our kind of, one 18th century little temple, that it would be like that. But, I mean, I think we Irish Dubliners, there's an extraordinary creativity that just seems to be in the air, in everything that we do. And I suppose we're prepared to kind of chance it, take a chance, take a gamble, have courage, do things, and I know your wonderful work at the little museum. You know, all of us have to try and look for funding, finance support everywhere. But you know, it's worth aiming high, because you know, if you're only going to hit what you aim for, and you know, we feel these projects could bring a lot of pleasure to our visitors. They make it a reason to go there. You know, I mean, much and all, as I'm a huge admirer of the work that we do, and people will come to the sites for the architectural tour, for the history, and knowing the people who created the buildings and who lived there. You know, sometimes you have to have another hook too. You have to have, you know, why now? Why go this week? And you know, the kind of temporary exhibitions or lectures or musical events are reasons to really get the person there right now.
Yeah, and it is funny because it's throwing away the inaccurate misconception of build it and they will come. Like, there is so much more that goes into it than that, and it's I can't help but wonder, you know, as you said, the casino at Marino is, I think, what was it you said? Basically in your back garden, in the same way, like Rathfarnham Castle is somewhere that I could have almost thrown a stone at from my school back in the days, and it would have been nearby. So these are sites that are kind of naturally and authentically part of our lives since childhood, and that we've kind of grown up in the city and grown up with these resources around us. And one thing I was really curious about in how you approach programming and how you approach artist engagement and community engagement is kind of the role, I may word this question wrong or poorly, but the role that you as an organization and a collection of really special properties can have in actually empowering members of the public to engage with arts and culture. So that maybe it's experiencing a piece of art that you may have found too intimidating to visit in a certain setting, but kind of dipping the toe in the water in an environment that is very familiar and accessible. And I wonder, is that a conscious consideration?
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. I mean, it would be something I would be very conscious of myself, that, you know, my own background would want me to feel very strongly. I mean, I studied economics as my undergraduate, and I went on to kind of explore art history and material culture and things like that. So I suppose I have these two kind of sides of my brain that work on things. But going back to my kind of economist days, you know, I'm really a massive advocate that access to any type of culture should be and needs to be advocated, that it's for everybody in society. It's for everyone. And you know, I mean, it's something I think all of us working in the cultural sector have to continue to keep working to see, how do you make that happen? You know, I mean, it's a tragedy, and it's not right if some free cultural stuff is still a middle class type of thing. And you know, I work very hard, and so do my teams, to make sure that's not what's happening where we work. So we feel, and you know, we continue to work in these areas all the time. So I agree with you that because a lot of the properties are in suburban areas, as you say, you've Rathfarnham Castle in Rathfarnham and St. Enda's Park, you've the casino here in Marino, you know, like, they are embedded in the community, and maybe we're easier able to get to that than some of the cultural institutions that are absolutely, you know, in the city centre, which sometimes find it hard to maybe have a local kind of audience, because not that many people can actually have the opportunity to live right in the city centre. So audience engagement is very important. And you know, things like Heritage Week, Culture Night, Open House, you know, they've all been good vehicles to make sure, you know, it's a friendly way that you're saying to people, no, please don't be intimidated. And you know, I mean, it's something that I feel really strongly about. I think it's a real tragedy if people feel you know, to cross the threshold, maybe that's not for me, or what would I be doing there. So you know, I think challenging ourselves all the times to see what would make it more comfortable for someone to feel this is definitely for me, and all that. So I'm very proud of my colleagues in the different sites that make a big effort to make sure our local communities are involved. And we've been lucky. The government have supported, different free access at different times. So hopefully that's, another barrier removed that helps. I like your thinking and what you're saying about how we can make this real for people. And it's something I often puzzle over, of like, how do you make yourself relevant? Like, if people are busy doing this, that, and the other, like what's the thing you do to make sure that they will come and access their history, their whatever. And in some of these places, I suppose a certain number of the sites that I look after may have a kind of a feeling of colonialism attached to them, and really, are they our history, different things. And we like to say to people, no, please come in, learn a little bit more about this, and you'll find out that actually the history is very complex. People who may have been an aristocrat, they may have been this, that, and the other, and yet they're also the patrons that have left us different things. So it's sort of like, be open-minded yourself, and actually there's a very interesting history to find.
I think when you talk about rich, complex histories, it immediately directs me to Dublin Castle. And I think, rather than being too prescriptive, I guess my question is, what is the fact or the story that you've come across over the years about Dublin Castle that you personally found most fascinating?
I'd probably pick an odd one out of this in terms of that. I'd probably pick the kind of Bram Stoker story, because I'm a kind of a big advocate for the more modern history that goes with the castle, and I think it's a really fascinating story that both he and his father worked at Dublin Castle and had spent their working lives and days. So from time to time, when I have read Dracula myself, I've been kind of trying to see if I can find elements of, or any little shadows of time at Dublin Castle. And indeed, of course, he lived here on the Crescent in Marino, and again close to the casino. And in fact, the Crescent and things like that are mentioned in Dracula. So I think Bram Stoker, I do think myself there's a lot of potential to probably make that story a lot more vibrant in terms of how it connects to Dublin Castle. So I suppose for me, I'm always looking for opportunities. I'm looking for the next opportunity. And I suppose in a certain way, the medieval history, the later history in Dublin Castle in the 19th century, the 18th century, and the time of the beginning of the foundations of the state are kind of quite well known and told in the castle. So for me, I think I will be interested to uncover and tell a little bit more about the working life of Bram Stoker at Dublin Castle.
That sounds like a lecture that we would love to invite you to give in the little museum anytime you want.
Watch this space.
Exactly. And then one thing I was curious to know a little bit more about, Castletown House, which is kind of moving out to the skirts of the city a little bit further. But I read Castletown House described as one of the most architecturally important 18th century country houses in Ireland. And I guess I would love to just, as someone who doesn't come from an architectural background, I'd love to understand a little bit more in kind of unpacking what that means.
Yeah, well, I suppose first of all, to start off with, Castletown House, which was the patron of it is William Connolly, who was Speaker of the Irish House of Commons in Parliament, and designed, we understand, by Alessandro Galilei, who's an Italian architect who designed St. John Lateran in Rome. Also assisted by Sir Edward Lovett Pearce. So when they say it's one of the most important 18th century houses, it is because it adopted the Palladian style, which was the style of architecture by Andrea Palladio in the 16th century, but it adopted in the 18th century in Ireland in country house style of building. And so it was at the early stage, at the same time as Rusborough House. So it's in the early 18th century. Castletown was started the construction and building in 1722. And it is the largest house in Ireland. It's absolutely enormous. And as I say, so I suppose it has this pedigree of being the most important Irish 18th centuries because it's at the very start of this story of Palladianism in Ireland. And the last one is Aldborough House, which is here, on Amiens Street. So that was the last, as such, Palladian house built ever in Ireland, just at before the Act of Union. So we're very proud. I mean, we'd love for anyone listening tonight to make sure that they do try and get out to Castletown House. The minister, Patrick O'Donovan, has made access to the National Historic Properties free of charge this year in relation to COVID-19. And, I would encourage anyone who can to get out there. It's an absolutely sensational building to experience in the flesh as such yourself, and everything about the construction and design is just to such a high degree, from the design aspect of the plaster work, which is by the Lafrancini brothers from the Swiss-Austrian border, and there's this incredible staircase that will just sort of take your eye out, with its beautiful brass balustrades. And of course, the painted decorations inspired by the excavations at Pompeii are in the Long Gallery in Castletown, which is very, very beautiful. The grounds are sensational also at Castletown, linking into the River Liffey. And, it's been a plan and a design of the OPWs to, try and connect the Liffey from Dublin at Heuston Station the whole way down to Selbridge. There's a wonderful trackway there, so for cycling, for walking, and there is an initiative that OPW and the various different county councils that would kind of engage with that whole waterways and inland waterways, whereby we can encourage, be it on the river or on the trails on the way down, to try and just help us link, the site back to the city. And William Connolly, who built Castletown House, lived on Capel Street, so his main house was in Capel Street. So we love this idea of continuing the resonances that are in that history and keeping them alive and keeping them going. And of course, Castletown is associated with that wonderful BBC dramatisation of Stelia Tilliard's book, The Aristocrats. And again, it shows that wonderfully romantic story, I suppose, of the Lennox sisters that lived, all of them being daughters of the second Duke of Richmond in London, and three of them making their lives here in the Selbridge, Leixlip area. And it's kind of just a fascinating story how these young aristocrats arrive and live in Ireland. And of course, they marry the two most important gentlemen available. They marry the first Duke of Leinster, who has Carton House and Leinster House, and then William Connolly's great granny nephew, Tom Connolly. So Lady Louisa Connolly marries him. So, it's a wonderful legacy that the people of Ireland, and certainly those living in Leixlip, Maynooth, Lucan and Selbridge, get to enjoy on a daily basis, these incredibly beautiful designed landscapes that offer back, I think, now to all of us incredible places to walk, to enjoy, as you referenced earlier on, the incredible variety of biodiversity that is there. And, I suppose we're hoping that in creating cultural destinations of the caliber of Farmleigh, Castletown, Rathfarnham Castle, that we're reimagining how these properties can be available to all of us as citizens, as we are now in the 21st century. Because, I think it's important that we imagine a future for these places, and that we continue to see how they can be useful to people and how they can improve the quality of life of everyone living here.
And I think as you mentioned, the decision from the department and working with yourselves to actually make these sites available and kind of freely accessible for the next couple of months in response to the pandemic, I thought was such a generous and wonderful thing to really encourage people to get out and to actually, know our hometowns a little bit more this summer. But you're kind of talking about, on the one hand, there's the focus on trying to engage us, the general public, with the value of these properties and these sites, but you also do, I think you mentioned it kind of in passing earlier on, you do engage quite heavily with the academic world as well. So I know there's the Centre for the Study of Historic Houses and Estates, but then you've also got the OPW Maynooth University Archive and Research Centre, kind of collectively working towards this idea of raising and broadening interest in the cultural value of the Irish country house. And I'd love to know a little bit more about, I guess you were saying that you've been working on this for approaching kind of 20 years, and just how the public perception and the kind of the academic side of it has been evolving over time.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for the opportunity to kind of talk a bit more about that. I mean, I suppose, like for any good company, you have to invest in your R&D if you want to kind of come through a process and have something in the pipeline to come out a bit later on. So I suppose, I guess when I started, particularly I think at Castletown would have been the kind of moment for maybe further academic engagement. And, if I can go back a little bit, Farmleigh and Dublin Castle were the two properties that the Office of Public Works ran until 2004. So in 2004, the government decided to return all of the monuments and historic properties to OPW. Had been gone for a long period of time. And I suppose during that period of time, Dublin Castle and Farmleigh had, I suppose, been very much brought into the modern world. I mean, they served government, and then there was this cultural role that was being established. And, I'd like to just again take a moment to remember that, I suppose, the end of the 80s and into the 90s and the first EU presidency, there was a generation of people who really did incredible work at Dublin Castle, dragging it from this dilapidated group of buildings into something that could work and serve the country, and this whole sense of several presidencies, unrolled there, and it became quite dynamic as a symbol of reuse of old buildings and finding a new use for them. So when the rest of the properties came to the OPW in 2004, I do think there was a kind of a more energy and more focused, say, let's just make sure that within the resources available that we're just really trying to improve standards, improve the offer. Definitely, I suppose one thing I hope that I myself have brought to these understandings and presentations of places is that, a lot of the time there's low-hanging fruit, and it's sort of like, you can't kind of put all your eggs in one basket and conserve a property. Sometimes you have to say, well, look, is there somewhere for people to picnic? Is the litter management kind of going okay? Is there public transport either here, or is there parking? So it's kind of, I suppose I would like to feel, I tried to look at it as, a nice place to spend time. And I wanted to kind of look at it from that point of view, because I think that's kind of how most of us interact with things that are near us, and you're going to use them if they're organized in a way. So, I wouldn't like you to think that I'm not interested in all of the other aspects of it, but I suppose I have a lot of colleagues who are very skilled and very expert in the conservation or the different things. So I suppose I wanted to make sure that the bit that I can do is making it very coherent to our visitors, and making sure I had a kind of a product to offer them, because that's how I worked out and felt myself that might be a help, and that might work. And so in terms of ratcheting up, I suppose professionalism was something that was at the heart of what I was thinking about. And so just before, let's say, I embarked on the Castletown project at Farmleigh with my colleagues, in particular Julia Commons, our librarian, we also were at the very early stage of getting involved with the Museum Standards Programme of Ireland, because again, I felt very much that would be a tool that I could say to people, we're doing it to this standard, and it would give confidence to people that the work would be done really well. So I suppose that brought us into a world of saying, well, let's say we were up for another challenge, which was then, and I sort of felt if we push the dial along then and say, let's be very open to academic engagement. So I went to Professor Terence Dooley myself. He had recently written the report on the fate and the future of Irish country houses. And, I kind of said to him, look, I'm at an early stage here, what could we do together to make sure that historians, researchers, young undergraduates, that we're very available if they want to come and do work with us. So I suppose it was with collaboration at the heart of it. And that's something maybe we can go on to talk a little bit more about, but I really feel, the collaboration is really at the heart of where all of us can kind of have one and one making three, and I think all of us in the sector, find enormous advantages and rewards from pooling the kind of sheer human capital and cultural capital and fusing it together and seeing if we can deliver more. So that opened us up to a world of conferences that we probably weren't doing before, or organizing workshops, and it definitely has led to many MAs and some PhDs, and a lot of buildings and people and collection items being researched, and then that research following through and being part of what we can share with the public. So for example, I remember one lovely MA student, Mary Byrne, came and herself researched the embroidered panels that are in Farmleigh. So we went from having no idea what their provenance was, where they were made, what the iconography was about, to then getting this incredible paper on and sharing all of that with us. So I suppose it set us off on this journey that, there's a community who want to research. We're making our archives, the material culture of the actual tapestries available, and then we get something that we can share with our visitor and share internationally. I mean, a lot of that work went on to be shared at textile conferences all over the world. And you're offering something out to the world about our material culture. So that has kind of continued into a pattern. I think once you dip your toe in the water, more people come on board. There's this Ashingham Country House Studies course that's in the UK, and we've reached out to them and got involved with them, and a lot of continued research is coming from them as well. And so I think that I would feel strongly that tonight, in terms of chatting and our audience who are listening to this, that's something that I think is very important, our international engagement, because sometimes we really can learn a lot from people. And I'm always like, I kind of cross-examine anyone, particularly from outside the island, kind of like, well, what do you think of what we're doing? Can we do it better? What do you like? What don't you like? Because I think you just learn so much. And sometimes, again, as I say, we've been humbled to find that people will say, actually, you're doing, this is, as good as it gets, really, and that's it would never mean that you kind of sit on your laurels or anything, but I think it's important. You need to kind of be getting some feedback, and I mean, in a lot of cases, I would be very inspired by their work, and I would be challenging myself and our teams to want to explore new avenues. So you're getting an awful lot of ideas from things like that. So I think this larger circle of academia, but academia very often fusing again off that into some practical things. So I mean, we are, I think, having different parts to the work, they can all inspire and work with other parts. So for example, in Castletown, through our research of the classical busts that are in the Long Gallery, we ended up finding out a lot more about those classical busts, and then having a project called On a Pedestal, which was again an exhibition by living artists responding to that idea, the classical busts, and making new busts today. So, I just think that there's a lot that can be drawn from research, from to things that we can do today. So that type of collaboration with the university sector, but also with parts of industry and societies. So, for example, we would do a lot of work with the Design and Craft Council of Ireland. We would also work with the Arts Council and various different other groups and societies, always hoping that what will come out of that is of benefit to our stakeholders.
And sorry, I have multiple questions going through my mind right now from what you've just said there. And I guess kind of potentially one short one to lead into a kind of a bigger conversation. One thing we think about a lot in the Little Museum is this idea that our work is both in the tourism industry and in the hospitality industry, as well as culture and heritage. And I wonder, how do you see your role, our collective role, whichever way you choose to answer it, as part of tourism and hospitality?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I remember at one stage being down in Kilkenny Castle, and you know, I'm kind of telling this story against myself, but I remember you know, chatting with our teams, just exploring ideas, and one colleague in the room anyway, and you know, we have very open and frank ideas, because you know, that's the only way you kind of get to the best ideas. And so one of them said, you know, I could hear somehow or other it kind of emerged anyway throughout the afternoon's conversation. Well, Mary wants to turn us all into hotel workers, you know, and like and I suppose I took up that on and just said, and what's wrong with that? You know, because I sort of feel very strongly myself, and it's interesting that you're asking that question, because myself and my colleagues at Farmleigh in the very early days, we were part of the pioneering group that did Ireland's Best. I'm not sure if you know of that, Sarah, of that particular module that Fall to Ireland offered many years back. And I will still say, and I often say it to colleagues, it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. This was a hospitality training course offered by Fall to Ireland. And it you know, because like, you know, my own personal philosophy will be is there's no job that I'm not prepared to do. Anybody who will know me will know I will go around and pick up litter wherever I see it, because you know, I just sort of like it for me, everything reflects what we're doing, and I think everything that's there has to be to the standard we like. And you know, I think people will only respect the work we're doing if we respected ourselves as the people operating it. So, you know, I mean, so I feel very strongly. I mean, we have wonderful guiding colleagues on our teams. I think a lot of the training for a lot of our guiding teams is often so much into the history and all the rest that sometimes, and all I would just say in adding this is that I myself feel the hospitality aspect of it is as important as any other aspect of it, because you see, we're in a customer service business. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you know, so I would be very proud that the teams that work with me certainly adhere to that, but it has all definitely come from this sense of doing the Ireland's Best. I mean, I would wonder if I would have such an understanding of how important that is if I hadn't received that training. And I always feel myself, I think Ireland's hospitality hotel sector is really exceptional, because whatever the training, I've often thought myself, whenever I meet a hotel manager or meet people in that industry, I'm always so impressed with how they carry themselves, how professional they are. And it was always my own goal to say, well, look, you know, heritage and culture, we ought to really be taking a page from that book, and we should feel, you know, and I have a great colleague in Farmleigh, Georgina Davis, and Georgina is like, she's absolutely so trained in the hospitality professionalism, and Georgina will kind of just take such a pride in how well that welcome is, you know, and I just think, you know, I mean, it's such a special thing in Ireland. We're known for it all over the world, and I just think we all need to embrace that. So for me, I think we fuse very well. I mean, from our point of view, we earn a lot of the income that pays for the work that we do. And sometimes people wouldn't understand that the OPW takes in substantial income, mainly from foreign overseas, And that goes back into the system to help fund the protection and conservation work. So that's something that we're very proud of, that it's not a drain and a lien on the exchequer in its entirety. I mean, there's clearly a lot of money goes into capital projects and different things. And so while in this 1 year there's a hiatus on that and there isn't really foreigners anyway coming here, that I just sort of, again, we just sort of like to say that is a role we play in terms of. So I think we have to, we work very hard to make sure the overseas visitors, do have this wonderful experience. So I suppose we're definitely, we don't like, we're definitely in the job very much of being, I don't think there's any, I think the culture and heritage part of our work is something that has an end in itself and needs to be done and can be done. But I think it's required and necessary that it's part of tourism as well. And I think they go hand in hand, and I don't think they have to be exclusive or anything. So I think they can be mutually beneficial. And it's kind of really, in my book, it's all about standards, and anything is possible once you kind of understand the rules of engagement and things like that. So I like working in a challenging environment. I think it's good to challenge ourselves. I think diversity is very good. So I think seeing different people's points of view is very good. So I find in our engagement, be it with bus operators, be it with tourism colleagues, be it with heritage colleagues, you're kind of getting a rounded view when you listen to all of them. And I think once we can kind of keep our super principles together in terms of preservation being totally important, everything else, we try and accommodate and work within that.
I think we are, I get the impression we sing off the same hymn sheet, Mary. I think. But I kind of, Sarah, you've mentioned Farmleigh a few times, and one thing I wanted to ask you about, if we take the example of the Benjamin Ivy Gallery, which obviously the collection was donated to Marsh's Library, but is curated and cared for by the OPW. Thinking about this, it got me really interested in this idea of partnerships and, ultimately the benefit to the city in kind of how we can all work together to create the best possible livable city experience. And I just, you kind of touched on partnerships and kind of collaboration a little bit. I'd love you to just tease out your thoughts a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I mean, the Guinness family have this incredible link to Dublin and what Dublin is today. And you're there in St. Stephen's Green are having the lovely benefit of the Guinness family's work on St. Stephen's Green there. So I mean, they're a family that have given so much to Dublin. And we were delighted. We could see that at the time when that became a gift to the city, that their allegiances were kind of caught between a long history of involvement with Marsh's and St. Patrick's Cathedral, and then the current Earl's father had collected that particular library at Farmleigh. So we were delighted. I mean, I'm a great believer in the fact that through, I suppose, negotiations and looking, as you say, and creating a kind of a vision for the city, that we could, there was a win-win opportunity available there. So we worked very hard with our colleagues in Marsh's and with the family themselves, and we came to a lovely resolution that it would reside always at Farmleigh, because that's where it was collected, and that it would be owned by Marsh's. So we're getting that lovely win-win whereby we have the resources of again more research capability through Marsh's, and yet we're the custodians and the minders, and Nuala Canny is our very accomplished librarian who manages the library there. And I think hopefully some of these schemes give inspiration to other patrons and others who might want to think about joint ideas and think about ways to help society. And it just struck me that in knowing that I'd be talking to you tonight, to kind of reference that, I suppose Derek Hill gave his beautiful property in Donegal to the nation. And then we have Altamont House, which again was bequeathed to the nation. And we have the beautiful Garnish Island donated to the to Ireland. I mean, you don't really get all that many Irish people today wanting to do this type of thing. So I suppose we're keen at any stage where there is an opportunity to kind of just cite who's doing what. And, you know, and I would give huge credit to the Guinness family for the continued, I suppose, philanthropy right into the 21st century that you know, that they are doing. And there are many very valued colleagues who are very generous. I mean, I would cite the Friends of the National Collection, seem to be an incredible organization who are forever trying to drum up money to buy what, you know, important artworks that make a difference and help explain stories. So I think the Irish Georgian Society, you know, there are a lot of, there's the Apollo Foundation, there are organizations, if not individuals, and sometimes individuals too. And of course, there are some well-known patrons of the arts who donate to the national cultural institutions and things like that. But I feel that we hope, and I'm always glad to say that if there are collections that people feel they would like to put in some of the historic houses, that these would help interpret them and things like that. I mean, sometimes there can be a very good win-win situation.
And I'm really curious about the kind of the process of making something happen when you are an organization like the OPW. One thing you mentioned earlier this week is that you're on a steering committee for the transformation of it. Is it St. Sepulchre's, in terms of turning it into a cultural site? I kind of, you know, for a project that's kind of, I would imagine, relatively early, I'd love to know what goes into achieving that ambition, or what that ambition looks like, or maybe it's far more advanced than I'm aware of. What can you tell us?
Well, look, for anyone, and you know, I mean, I suppose your wonderful podcast is all about back to you know, generating and regenerating the spirit of Dublin, what's great about Dublin, the people of Dublin, the tangible and the intangible cultural heritage. And I suppose St. Sepulchre's, which was Kevin Street Garda Station up to very recently, is there. It's one of the medieval structures of our city, and it's kind of the last remaining major one that has been really behind this very high wall. Anybody walking by Kevin Street, you know, you have to peer in if you can at all to try and see it. So I suppose there is a vision that becomes back into public access, awareness, and all the rest. So, you know, I think while it currently has functioned as a Garda station, and it has had a long history as the kind of metropolitan police station and all of these things, it's in such a special part of the city, close to Dublin Castle, close to Marsh's Library, St. Patrick's Cathedral, the National Archives, the Deanery. And I think that everyone would love to see that become an anchor in that part of the city, the whole link into the Ivy Market and the Liberties, which at the end of the day holds a huge amount of the intangible history of the city, and linking into Auden. So the building is in state ownership, and there have been years and years already of stakeholder conversations from all of the wonderful people who have buildings or run institutions in the area, many of which I've just mentioned there. And the desire, I suppose, for most things, as we said earlier, that if you don't aim, you can't hit something unless you aim for it. So I guess while this is at an early stage, and of course huge amounts of public money will be needed to realize a goal like this, there are a number of people who are just doing their best to see if through initial surveys and things like this, that we could build momentum to make something like this happen. It's obviously a complicated set of arrangements between the Garda Síochána and their requirements and needs, and really as a cultural building, what it could offer the city. So we will just have to see, Sarah, how all of that work continues. But I know that there are a huge amount of advocates in the OPW who would want to be seen to be leading on this saving of this wonderful building for the city. And I suppose it kind of leads us in nicely to just really, I suppose, stepping back even a little bit from what it is that the Office of Public Works manages and minds in the city, to, I suppose, just as we come to the conclusion here of just seeing it that we are one player in the management and running, and hopefully in the setting of the vision for our city as it goes forward. And I think, as I'd mentioned to you earlier, I have this kind of driving passion at the moment that the River Liffey being at the heart of our city is something that really we need to love up a little bit more. And I am at the early stages of hopefully trying to bring some stakeholders together. For example, Dublin City Council, Dublin Civic Trust, who've just won that wonderful Heritage Europa Nostra Award recently, and the Port Authority and EPIC, and anybody who's on the Liffey, to say, you know, we really need to make sure we conserve and preserve the wonderful Georgian quays that we have. And I see today that Liverpool has been stripped of its UNESCO World Heritage status, which is a very embarrassing situation for its city. Now, we haven't got that designation yet, which is another hobby horse of mine. And I feel for our Georgian city certainly could merit that going into the future. But you know, we're definitely not going to ever get that designation unless we begin to love and protect all of our Georgian heritage on the quays. And I suppose I'm a kind of a student of the wonderful late Kevin B. Nolan, who was the chairperson of the Dublin Civic Trust for many, many decades. And Kevin had a true love of anything that was on the banks of the Liffey, the whole way down to Castletown House, where he was chairman of the foundation there for decades too. And he had a great vision, really, that what we had was incredibly special and important. And, you know, I suppose I just feel our generation now has a responsibility to, you know, fulfill and follow through on some of that. And in my own work, we have done conservation management plans as a vehicle to try and understand what we've got and to try and make good decisions about the future. And so I'm advocating, as part of your 120 Dublin stories, that a conservation management plan for the Liffey kicks off sometime soon.
Okay, well, I have every faith that you will accomplish that goal in due course with the stakeholders that you mentioned. Mary, you're so clearly so proud of all that our city has to offer and our country has to offer, but you're doing so much to actually improve the lives of us as citizens on a day-to-day basis. It really is. It's been both heartening and inspiring listening to you this evening. So sincerely, I would quite happily sit here for another hour or two and keep asking you questions. But on behalf of everything you do, really just thank you so much for taking the time this evening to give us a little bit of a taster.
Oh, listen, Sarah, it's been a pleasure. Look, there's huge advocacy for the city, and look, I'm just one small player in all of that. But look, working together, all of us, we can get there.
Very much so. We'll consider us on board. So to everyone who's been with us this evening, thank you so much for taking the time. So our guest this evening has been Mary Heffernan of the OPW, speaking about some of the national historic properties under her care. Mary, thank you so much.
And thank you, Sarah, for having me on board. Thanks so much, Sarah. Bye now. Good night. Bye.